Hey everybody, thank you for coming to the event tonight. My name is Hayden Smith. I'm the president for RHA.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Mangan, and I'm the president of the National Residence Hall Honorary. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Our topic tonight is on civil discourse and eliminating bias in our discussions. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Aaron King.
Dr. King is an associate professor of political science within the Department of Public and International Affairs at UNCW, where he also serves as the coordinator for the undergraduate program in political science. He received his PhD from Duke University in American politics and political methodology and completed his undergraduate work at Michigan State University. He is currently in his 9th year at UNCW, where he teaches and research focused broadly on American politics, competition, and representation. His research has been published in various outlets, including the American Politics Science Review, the Journal of Political Science Education, Congress and the Presidency, Social Science Computer Review, and Politics and Policy, along with several book chapters, as well as a monograph entitled Unfolding Ambition in Senate Primary Elections, Strategic Politicians and the Dynamics of Candidacy Decisions. He resides in Wilmington with his wife, Lori, and their two daughters, Claire and Ellie. Dr. King, thank you so much for joining us this evening. The floor is yours.
Good to be here. Thank you guys all for having me. You had asked for my bio, so I sent that. I assumed you'd read like one sentence, so that made me sound probably a little bit more important than I am. So it is really cool to be here. I do really enjoy talking, not just to the students in my class, but whether it's other students or members of the public that may not have the same sort of background in political science that I do. And so obviously during an election year, there's a lot of questions that people have. And so when y'all reached out to talk about civil discourse, I figured this was a great opportunity. So glad to spend the evening and get to know you guys a little bit better and hopefully try to make you think a little bit differently about some of the things that you're already interested in. And so tonight I've entitled the talk, The Promise, parenthesis, and Peril of civil discourse, and have an example of not very civil discourse right on the slide. I want to just mention a couple other things about my background in addition to that bio, in part because I'm going to come back to this later and tell you a little bit about how my background, I think, informs how I think about politics and political science, but also civil discourse. You mentioned in the bio there, I went to Michigan State University for undergrad, political science, geography were my two majors. I was in the honors college there. Ended up going to Duke University for graduate school for master's and PhD. Two very different universities in very different parts of the country. And I'm still a loyal Michigan State fan. Don't have any interest in the ACC. And as you guys are all experiencing, your education is a big part of who you are as a person, as well as who you are as a professional. And I think the older that you get, the more into your career, you'll look back and just realize how important that training was. So that's important for me to remember. Like you said, I'm in the Department of Public and International Affairs. Here we have the political science major. We also have 7 different minors ranging from pre-law to campaign management to security studies, international affairs, nonprofit management, public administration, and the like. I'm the coordinator for the undergraduate program in political science. I've coordinated trips through what I call the Washington, D.C. Hawks program to Washington, D.C. So I'm involved in a lot of different things. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you or any viewers of this have about our programs here. And of course, then there's the family. One of the reasons that I say this is in the crazy time of 2020, it actually really helps me to stop thinking about politics sometimes and just think about my family. So here's Claire and Ellie. They were recently in a wedding this summer. There's Milo the beagle, and then we have 5 chickens, which is very illegal where we live, but my father-in-law got them for us. And so hopefully no one sees this recording that can get us in trouble, but I have a full happy family. So they certainly keep me busy and a little bit sane. I would encourage you at some point to find what gives you some relief from the craziness of politics and school and work and everything else, and use that to your advantage, particularly in terms of mental health. So I'm glad that we have a little bit of a smaller group here tonight because it allows us to actually have a little bit of discussion. And I know that you guys are all interested in this. And so before I really get into talking more about political science, I'm curious, and you guys all mostly have your cameras on, raise your hand if you enjoy talking about politics. Raise your hand if you enjoy. All right, I see I see two enthusiastic responses. I see one response, two that's very, very shaky in terms of, yeah, maybe. And so can you articulate why or why not? Why do you enjoy talking about politics? And then for those that didn't raise your hand, why not? What's the problem? What's the big deal? I think you should have the ability to unmute yourselves, and I think you can just probably shout it out. Is that the case?
Personally, for me, it always leads to both of us being angry and then walking away. So,
Okay. I mean, none of us like these awkward conversations, right? So that's fair. What about the people that said that they liked, I think it was Kendall maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I like talking about politics. However, if it's going to turn into an argument, that's where I kind of like don't like talking about it. Like if we're going to like start like arguing, like stuff like that, if it can remain civil, like I'm like, I like talking about politics. However, yeah, it's when it gets heated.
So when things turn south, that's when you want to turn it off. Others, is that a common sentiment among everyone?
There's some people that I'm very apprehensive talking politics with, particularly I think family members. I think that's a shared feeling across the board. You don't really want to have intense conversations with people that you care about because you never know which way it'll go.
Okay, so in that case, that's interesting that because you're concerned about what way it'll go, that maybe the conversation could be a little bit uncomfortable. Who do you like having political conversations with, and who do you dislike having political conversations with?
I like having political conversations with people who are going to take my points of view seriously, whether they believe them or not. I was recently talking to my cousin, and he had brought it up because I wouldn't bring it up. But he's very like opposite side than me, but he took everything I said like very seriously, and he was super respectful. So it ended up being a good conversation, and I really enjoyed it. But I normally don't enjoy having conversations with people who believe other things because it's hard.
Okay. Now, I want all of you guys to remember some of these, because the point of this talk was about having civil discourse. And so I'm curious about how your attitudes could help or hinder having civilly minded discourse, if that's a word. Okay, so I mean, you guys seem to all kind of be on a similar page. Politics, right? They say politics, religion, like people, you don't talk about those things, right? Because I think people are worried about how that can maybe hurt relationships, how that can, you don't want to have somebody maybe disagree with you. Is anyone uncomfortable talking about politics? I mean, would you say that you're all very politically informed and engaged? What role does that play in your willingness to talk about politics?
I know if I don't really know what I'm talking about, I'll be more apprehensive to speak my opinion. So I always feel like I won't try to start talking about politics if I don't know it well enough. So
Did you say start a fight about politics?
no, start to talk.
Oh, start to talk. Okay, either way. I mean, now what I will say, and I know that some of you are a little bit further in the professional world, and you guys can back me up on this. One of the greatest life skills is to BS your way through things, right? So that's there you go, Teddy. Teddy's agreeing. But I think that's really common, that people don't feel confident enough to talk about things. I reached out to my presidency class, and this is a class that knows about politics and cares about politics, because I was contacted by a local NPR station that said, hey, we want to talk to some students about politics. I want a Trump supporter, a Biden supporter. And how many of them volunteered? Like one. And while the one person that was really excited, I was like, I'm not really sure he'd be the best person to talk about this. And then other people, I sort of had to push them, and I sent a name in, and I'm not even sure what came of it. And then I just got a call today from an NPR station in Boston. They're doing a series about politics and talking to voters, and they said, "Can you help me find some everyday Americans in North Carolina that would be willing to talk as part of this program?" So one, if any of you fit the description of, let's see, they wanted a everyday American that supports Trump, a person of color that supports Biden, and they wanted a somebody that was undecided, or somebody that would cast a vote for multiple parties on different offices. So if anyone is interested in that, I am still looking for people. But my point is, no one volunteers for this stuff. I mean, here's your chance to be on NPR and have all sorts of people listen to you, and people immediately freak out, in part because they're like, oh my goodness, what if they ask me tough questions? If I actually talk about what I think, someone might judge me, right? So those feelings are all out there. So you guys are not alone in that regard at all. So I think that Kendall's heard this story before, but in all my classes I talk about this. And I want to have, I mean, particularly some of you have a pretty good background in science, it would seem like. So what is the definition of political science is the first question. So what do you think? Somebody tell me what you think political science is. What am I all about? I mean, that's why you logged in to see. So maybe I'm right. That's part of all this. What do you think political science is?
I think it's like kind of the study of politics and like maybe psychology behind it.
Okay, that's fair. So maybe another question is, do you consider me a scientist? Political science. The word science is there, but do I count as a scientist? Why or why not?
Do you do experiments?
Sure, we can do experiments.
Okay, then I consider you a scientist.
Okay, there you go. So from the scientist, right? Experiments. Okay.
Do you study or evaluate changed data over time?
Sure, plenty of data. Typically, people will say, no, I mean, maybe it's a soft science like that, or it's a social science, or, but I do all the same things scientists do, but instead of studying animals or organisms or atomic particles or celestial bodies, I study humans and institutions, right? There's still data, there's still the scientific method. Everything you do in science is the same sort of thing I do. And I would dare make the case that if you look around right now, as we'll talk about in a second, how crazy is the political landscape right now? My guess is in the biological landscape, that animals today are probably acting like they did last year and the year before that. I'm sure that there's some exceptions. If you know any political people, they're crazy. And as a political scientist, my job is to try to make sense of that. And in this particular environment, it's difficult to make sense of things. But as a scientist, I do the same thing that a physicist or a biologist or a chemist does, but it's just a matter of you're looking at different phenomena. And the way that I differentiate it, you guys are very familiar with politics. And maybe that's what you think that political science is. Politics are extremely normative. Normative meaning, what should we do? Who should we elect? What should we legalize? What should we ban? What should we do? And many of the arguments or the conversations that you talk about are all these should questions. We should do this. You should vote for this person. If you don't, you're an idiot. Right? And how scientific is politics? Not very scientific, right? You can't prove that you're right and I'm wrong. That's not really a thing. You can try, but I can find data to back me up. You can find data to back you up, and then it's fake news and it's this or that or the other, right? Political science is empirical. It's scientific. It's not what should be happening. It's what is happening and why is it happening. Trying to explain how things are related, what voters do, what non-voters do, how the laws impact what people can do. how government institutions affect what politicians do, right? So I really try to get students to think from the perspective of political science and not politics. I do not talk about my personal views in class. I know some professors do. It's not something that I think is part of my job as a political scientist. I think I can speak about things as a political scientist, and sometimes views come out in there. But as a scientist, you don't really want your predispositions and your biases to impact your results, because then that tarnishes the results, right? And I don't know if regular scientists have very strong feelings about the experiments they do, but I know that certainly in politics, people have strong feelings. And I feel like I'm better able to go about the scientific method when I sort of separate out some of the things I think and some of the things that I'm actually observing. And so in my classes, certainly politics comes up, but the focus, it doesn't matter to me if a student's a Democrat, Republican, or anything. My job is to try to use data and an analytical and empirical approach to understand what the hell is happening, right? So when I was asked about civil discourse, I was thinking, okay, well, civil discourse is an important part of a democracy, right? If you have high quality civil discourse, maybe the strength of a democracy, government by the people, is better, right? So when we think about what makes up a democracy, there's all sorts of definitions. So, some of it is you want citizens that are informed, that are educated about things, whether it's issues or candidates or elections. You also want citizens that are active, that they actually participate, right? They know what the issues are. They might do some research to figure out what they think. They participate when it's time to participate. They communicate with their representatives. And politics comes about because there's problems that we face as society. And in society, we may not be able to solve those problems ourselves. And so we have to work with others. And government is a way to have people working on our behalf. In a representative democracy, we're electing officials to do things for us. An important part of democracy is also some level of agreement about the rules, or who gets to decide, who has power, right? So in the classroom, by coming to UNCW, by agreeing to take a class, by looking at the syllabus, you sort of agree that as I'm the professor, I have power. I get to give you a grade, I get to assign homework, right? And in theory, at least in theory, you'll sort of follow the direction and do what you're supposed to do. Well, government and constitutions and rules and laws are all about power. So who has the ability to enforce the laws and to write the laws and to adjudicate the laws? Who has the ability to tell you that you are not allowed to speak? Who has the ability to say you need to wear a mask, right? And one of the things that government is supposed to do is it's supposed to help us accomplish things that we can't do on our own. Of course, people have very different views on what government should do. But I do think that if you're asking me to talk about civil discourse, that becomes part of a healthy democracy. So what about 2020? Here's my description of 2020. "2020 could be characterized by hyper-partisan behavior. People that are extremely polarized on the left and the right, Republicans and Democrats. 2020 could be characterized by what is known as negative partisanship. Not just are there Democrats or Republicans, but the fact that you have such a negative view of the other side, right? That not only do you believe in this, but you strongly dislike this. Like if you're a big sports fan, sometimes don't you want your rival to lose as much as you want to win, right? And so people are saying, I support Joe Biden because I don't like Donald Trump and I don't like Republicans, or vice versa, right? So when partisanship isn't just sort of how you identify politically, but it sort of becomes this level of brinksmanship and polarization. I think certainly in 2020, we've seen key issues divide our country, whether it's locally here on campus, it could be at the state level, nationally, internationally, right? There's all sorts of issues we could point to, from civil rights and race relations and law enforcement to the pandemic, right? In 2020, compromise seems like a dirty word, right? that if you compromise, you're compromising your principles, or when you compromise, what that really means is the other side needs to come around to you. And they should change their mind to do what you want to do. And I also think 2020 could be characterized as a lack of trust in key institutions, a lack of trust in the media, a lack of trust in public officials, from health officials, a lack of trust in the validity of an election, right? And at the same time, a lot of these things are not necessarily new to 2020. I mean, some of these things have been around for another. 2020 is just a lot of things all at once, right? Would you guys say that I've accurately portrayed 2020 in your experience, talking to other people, talking to yourself? Why or why not? Anybody?
Yeah, I think you definitely portrayed 2020 accurately. It's just been one thing after the other. So.
Okay.
I agree as well. I think it's pretty accurately portrayed, and I think kind of like the issues aren't necessarily standing alone. Like I feel like the hyper partisanship and the negative partisanship has led to like a lack of trust in key institutions. It's led to compromise being like a dirty word and stuff like that. So I just think it's like one thing has led to another, and it's just all compounded. Like it's all kind of snowballed effect into this 1 year.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a second and disagree with you. Now that I just set that up. The average American still doesn't care that much about politics. They're not that engaged. They're not that interested. They're trying to feed their kids. They're trying to get a job, right? They might pay attention in elections, but the average American probably doesn't care as much. Now, when you think politics and think about like the craziest political people you know, and maybe that's you, right? Maybe you are that person. There's some crazy people politically. And you don't typically think about like, oh, there's just my neighbor. Like, is your neighbor as crazy politically minded as you? Maybe not. There's a couple ways. Sometimes people have talked in politics about this idea of a culture war. And it's interesting because Joe Biden's phrase is sort of restoring the soul or the backbone of America, right? This graph here, if you look at Democrats on the left and Republicans on the right, there's a couple of different ways you could see it. The first slide a second ago looks like this top part, where people are really divided. There's not very many people in the middle, right? And the people are sort of at the extremes. But conversely, the bottom part, which is maybe true for the average American, I mean, there's two sides, right? And people have opinions on different things, but maybe the average person isn't as polarized as somebody else. And so I think the answer is, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that 2020 is pretty crazy politically. And it depends on where you look, though. If you think about the people that are really engaged in politics, then the previous slide is right. It's kind of a shit show out there, right? And if you just look at the average voter or just the average person, maybe it's not that polarized. I mean, even look at voter turnout. Maybe in a presidential year, there's 65% voter turnout. You know, maybe 30% of those people are extremely polarized. Probably a lot of them aren't. And of course, that means 35% of people aren't voting at all, right? And so if you think about people that really care about politics, they're probably going to be voting. So it really depends on who you look at. Politicians are polarized. The most politically engaged people are polarized. The people that are far left, far right, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, they're pretty polarized. I mean, even this group here, you guys are not representative of the population at large. If you're on a college campus, the college campuses are not representative of the politics at large. My political science classes are much more politically engaged than other places on campus. So it's also important to sort of look out from beyond just yourself to realize your experience is not necessarily the same as everyone else's. I mean, nonetheless, I mean, 2020 is still pretty messed up. This is a tough time to have civil discourse, which makes the topic of this conversation even more important. Right? So here is some circumstantial data. This is from a non-representative survey. This is a survey that I did in my presidency class a couple weeks ago. I use this because it's relatively recent. It doesn't just have political science students in it. They shared with their families, and I shared with some neighbors and things like that. But my point is less about how representative it is and sort of what it reflects. So I asked people in an open-ended question, tell me the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you hear the word Trump, or the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you hear the word Biden. So I just want you to imagine for a second, what do you suppose some of the words that I got from people were? Just think to yourself. Maybe in your mind, how do you feel when you hear the word Trump? Or how do you feel when you hear the word Biden? And I don't want to put anybody on the spot. That's not what I'm about here. But here are some of the responses. And I wonder if this is on par with sort of what you might have expected. For Trump, racist, dumbass, divider, orange, hate, piece of shit. Biden, old as hell, pedophile. Well, settle for Biden. Creepy, last resort, and weak. These are actually some of the tamer ones. I'm doing a talk for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute next week, and I have a similar survey for them. And again, the same sorts of things come out. This looks more like that first slide about 2020, right? I mean, how are we going to have civil discourse when you have something like this, right? So that's sort of where we're at. So now I want to talk about what I view as ingredients for civil discourse. What do we need? And I think my hope is, particularly as you guys are all in leadership positions, dealing with students, that you might be able to help facilitate some of this. But part of that also starts with sort of you buying into it as well. All right. Listen, I'm not totally unlike you guys either. I don't really like talking about politics that much. One of the reasons that I love political science is I feel like then I can talk about political science and not politics, because politics gets messy. All right. So, first one, you need willing participants. Participants that want to have a civil discussion. And that can't be one participant in a discussion. It needs to be multiple participants. Otherwise, it just can't work, right? I mean, I think you have to think about, like, is civil discourse having a discussion, or is civil discourse about trying to convince somebody that you're right and they're wrong? Those are two different things, right? Like, how civil is it going to be when it's like, hey, you're wrong? Well, that's tough. Like, no one likes that. As opposed to, I'd like to understand why you think the things that you think. Let me tell you why I think the things that you think. Okay, so you have to have willing participants. The second part, let me reemphasize, no, really, you need to have willing participants. And it can't be people that just superficially are willing. All the time, I talk to people. Oh, listen, I am as open-minded as the next person. I am not biased. I have no problem listening to whatever else. I care about everyone's feelings. We're all Americans. We're all equal. Bullshit, right? Because the same people that say that are the people that say all of this stuff, right? You have to be willing. And by being willing, you have to be willing to hear somebody that has a different opinion than you. And we are not willing to do that as humans, right? That's very difficult. Are you able to stop the bias? Are you aware of the biases that you have? And that's a tough one. So that ingredient's important, willing participants, but what that requires is a lot. You need to have an appropriate setting to have a civil discourse. What is and what is not an appropriate setting for civil discourse? Anybody?
I don't know if you're going to touch on this. I think an appropriate setting involves having people of different views, if that makes sense. So I think, I guess that's already a given. Civil discourse, you're going to talk to someone that thinks differently than you, but not having all the people of all the same view or mindset.
Sure, you need a diversity of views. Yeah. That's valuable, right? I mean, otherwise you get what happens when you turn on the news and it's just everybody telling them how correct they are, right? What about, like, what does the setting look like to have a civil discussion?
I mean, just thinking to, like, any, like, conversation that could potentially be hard where people would, like, get upset in what I imagine is, like, a neutral setting. So, like, if you're going to talk to somebody else and you're going to have, like, a disagreement, like, don't go sit in a space that, like, they own. like go to like a private setting to have like this conversation. So like, I don't know, like maybe like outside sitting like at a table or like at a bench or like in a conference room or an office, like with just two people, but not in a space that like not like in my room with somebody else or in somebody else's room.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but I think that you're right. Other things about what's the appropriate setting, the appropriate context to have a civil discussion, or where is not the appropriate context. The first thing that comes to mind for me, stop trying to have a civil discussion online. We all know that's a terrible idea. When have you ever been on Facebook, been like, you know, I have some strong feelings, let me hear about you. You know what? You've convinced me. That never happens, right? And so when I see on my feed and there's like these 100-point conversations about people just going head to head on, like nothing good is going to come out of that, right? There's something about when you're sitting behind the safety of a computer screen that makes people feel really tough, right? People act differently when either things are anonymous. I mean, social media is not really anonymous, but certainly like when you look at the comment sections on different things, that could be anonymous, right? Face-to-face, people act very different than when they're, you know, texting. I think texting is a great way to communicate, but like what you lose in texting is like any sort of emotion or like sarcasm. And like we try to make up for it with like emojis and stuff like that. I mean, social media is the same thing, right? Like you have no social context to help you with that conversation. And so I think one bad place to do this is in a social media environment, right? When you're around a lot of people that you may not know, you may not interact with, right? But I think, again, an important part of it is how this conversation is going to take place, where it's going to take place. You have to be willing to participate, but in order to be willing to participate, you have to agree and acknowledge that the world is not nearly as black and white as you think it is. The world is complicated. Pick an issue, the pandemic. It could be any issue. To a lot of people, politics is really easy. I think that's it. If these problems were as easy as most people think they are, we probably would have solutions to them, right? I mean, think about the pandemic. There's competing things here. You want people to be healthy. You also don't want the pandemic to overtake everyone's lives and like educationally, right? I mean, it is risky for us to be open on campus. But we also say, well, geez, we can't just stop education altogether. It is bad for the economy to shut things down. So you have to worry about the education, the economy, right, jobs. And if it was just a matter of public health and we didn't have to worry about all that other stuff, well then, geez, we'd just sit at home all the time, we'd be okay, right? We're still struggling through this pandemic because there's so many different dimensions going on there. So you have to acknowledge that things are more complicated than a 140 character tweet, than just the sound bites or the headlines that you see on the news. Because if things are straightforward, what's there to discuss? We just need to do this and then move on, right? I mentioned the pandemic and different perspectives. Part of having a civil discourse is hearing other people's perspectives. And if we all shared the same perspectives, why do we need to talk about things? The reason it's uncomfortable to talk about things is because you might have a different perspective than someone else, and we feel self-conscious about that. Part of that is you need to get over the idea that you're right. What if you're not right? What if you're wrong? What if you don't know what you're talking about? Politics is really easy for people because I'm right and you're wrong. And therefore, I can't have a civil discussion with someone that I disagree with because I'm right and they're wrong. We're not on an equal footing here. I'm dismissing your view even before I hear it because I'm right and anything that's not what I think is not right. Who are you to think that you're right about everything? I know that I'm not right about everything, which is, I find this part of like becoming politically mature, right? As you get older, you learn that there's things that you don't understand just as a person, right? Like, oh, the world's complicated, right? Politics is no different. The more that you learn about different issues, the more that you learn about different perspectives, all of a sudden you start to question, shoot, what if I'm the one that's wrong here? Or maybe what I think is right might be right for me, but it's not right for you, right? Part of that is the idea of empathy. I'm really good. I talked about BSing earlier, about how that's a good, I say that I don't talk about my political beliefs. I am a political chameleon. I can go into any conversation and make you believe that I agree with everything that you're saying. And you could think that I'm a Tea Party Republican or a progressive liberal, right? But one of the things that I feel like I'm able to do from my life experiences, from my training in political science, is I'm able to be empathetic with people. And the quote that I have here is, I believe that you believe what you believe. So I could completely disagree with you. But in order to have a civil and productive conversation, I have to believe that you're coming at this like sort of being truthful and actually telling me what you feel. You could be totally wrong. But if who am I to discredit what you believe? Right? Now I could say, hey, maybe you should think about it like this. But if somebody's angry, it's not very effective to say, why are you angry about this? It does, like, they feel angry, right? To say, well, that shouldn't offend you. If they said they're offended, right? So you have to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. The fact of the matter is, we're all the way that we are because of our upbringing, our social circles, that sort of thing, right? If you switch places with anyone else on this chat, you would be completely like them, right? We're a product of sort of our environment, right? Which means when somebody supports Donald Trump, they might have a reason why they support Donald Trump, and you might support Biden, but there's probably a reason for that. Now, can people always articulate clearly why they support somebody? No. I mean, you hear these things all the time. I mean, there's hilarious clips on YouTube about, like, you start getting into political conversations and people just sound like idiots. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle it's, well, I think this and this, like, but that's what people think, right? Now, you can certainly disagree with them, but if you want to have civil discourse, you can't just totally dismiss somebody as being an idiot because they don't think the same thing as you, right? And so for all the people that love the idea of civil discourse, but then at the same time, I mean, I just put up there what people responded with Trump and Biden. But if I also put up there what you think of Republicans or Democrats, or what you think about the other political party, people would have pretty nasty things to say. Well, the civil discourse sort of starts with you. Like, you got to go in with an open mind. Your experience is not my experience. How I am is because of my experience, how you are, right? And that experience, it could be life experience. It could be educational experience. In one of my classes, I had a former journalist. He'd worked in journalism for 20 years. I was talking in class about the media and the presidency. I mean, I have an understanding of media and the presidency from the perspective of political science. But it would be shameful if I thought I had as good of a perspective on media as someone that's actually in media. Now, maybe the person that I talked to, like, he's maybe not representative of everybody else, right? But when, I see these arguments on Facebook, and I'm like you guys, I don't really want to engage in them, and I don't. But sometimes I'd be like, listen, guys, I'm not picking sides here, but I'm a political scientist. I've studied this stuff for a really long time. You're both just wrong about this, right? Like here, like, and you would think that people like have some respect for experience and different people's perspectives, right? Whatever it is, if somebody is not like you, it's really difficult for you to understand what they're going through. So if you're going to have a civil discourse, you need to come into it with the idea of, we're going to have different perspectives, but it's probably for a legitimate reason, right? And, when I think about the current election, right, there's some people, and I don't know on this call or elsewhere, but there's people that love Donald Trump, there's people that love Joe Biden, right? And the two sides can't really talk to each other. But if you think about it, the reasons why people may dislike a candidate and are not voting for them are also probably not the reasons why other people are voting for them, right? So you could say, okay, well, I don't like Donald Trump because of his inappropriate behavior and language, right? Well, the people that support Donald Trump are probably not endorsing that language, but maybe they have a different reason. Maybe economically things work better for them, maybe on different political issues, right? And so I think that to have a civil discussion, you have to be willing to acknowledge that people have different perspectives than you, and there might be a reason for it. And even if you can't put a reason for it, you need to trust them and say, oh, well, let me just learn about it, right? Because then as soon as you do that, you're no longer judging people, right? You're just hearing from what they have to say. So there's this idea of some research that I did previously, and it was actually about a colleague came to me and he had this idea based off some data that he had, and he wanted to write a paper about attitudes towards gay marriage. A number of years ago in North Carolina, there was a ballot initiative, other places around the nation, and it's all sort of moot now with Supreme Court cases and such. But the question was, first, how do people differ in their attitudes towards gay marriage, people who happen to be gay? But then also, how does their attitudes and their experiences shape how they would vote when it came to these constitutional amendments and ballot initiatives, right? And does anyone know who this is? Anybody?
Meaning.
Dick Cheney, former vice president under George W. Bush. Dick Cheney is here because his daughter is gay. And typically, if you think about politically speaking and ideologically, the Republican Party, more conservative people, are perhaps less open to the ideas that maybe there should be gay marriage or something like that, right? And so, especially at the time, I mean, this was a long time ago now, it didn't really match that. Wait a second, here's this pretty conservative vice president, a politician, and yet in this case, it doesn't matter what your beliefs are, his attitudes likely changed when his daughter told him that she was gay. Right. And so this idea of contact theory, it actually started in psychology. Contact theory started as people were trying to understand the conditions which Black people and white people could interact in a civil manner. And they really started studying this during World War II, when the military was desegregated. And what they found is under certain circumstances, you could have a really productive interaction between Black people and white people. I mean, if you think historically, there was a time, sometimes there still is, right, where if you had Black people together with white people, it was not going to be a productive discourse, right? And maybe in the long term, the most productive discourse comes around when people don't even notice color. You're just talking to another person, right? But the idea was that in certain circumstances, you can have more productive conversations and some contact is more beneficial than others. And so one of the things in that paper is when people knew somebody that was gay, they had very different opinions than people that were similar to them that didn't know someone that was gay, right? When you interact with somebody that's maybe different from you, particularly if it's a close person, you will have a better understanding and appreciation for that person. And you won't look at this person as, oh, this person is gay or this person's Black or this person's white, in part because of that close contact. You have a little bit more respect for that person. And so this goes back, a couple of you guys are talking about like talking to family and stuff. I mean, if there's anyone that you should be able to have a civil discussion with, wouldn't it be family? Like your parents, hopefully, will love you no matter what. Right? Whether you're gay, straight, Black, white, whatever it is, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. Now, in part, I certainly understand that when people have different feelings, like because you have that close relationship, you're worried about offending somebody, right? And I get that. But I think if you're somebody that wants to be part of a civil discussion, once you learn the views of other people that might be different from you, you'll have a much better appreciation for people that are not like you. And when I talk about the setting of where this can take place, imagine your best friend that you have a great relationship with, all of a sudden says, oh, I'm voting for the opposite person of you. Your mind's like, well, wait a second. I thought Republicans were this terrible caricature of what I've seen online. And yet, here's my best friend, and I really like them. They're a great person. Wait, they just actually disagree with me? And then you're like, well, wait a second. Like, maybe the other side can be normal people. Maybe there's good people on both sides that just have different views on things, right? And so that's why I think when thinking about a civil discussion, thinking about the setting, what ingredients do you need to have a productive amount of contact? So I mentioned sort of my bio a little bit before. I feel like I have had a lot of diverse experiences in my life, whether it's growing up in a kind of suburban small town in Michigan, going to different family members who were really on both sides of the political aisle, I would say, both in my immediate family today, my extended family on both my side, my wife's side of the family. In terms of education, I studied at a relatively homogenous high school, not much diversity, went to a school of 45,000 people, State University, then went to grad school among Duke, and Duke is relatively elite, right? And then in terms of employment, I work in higher education and academia. It's a relatively unique environment. My wife and her family, they run a trucking company. She works with truck drivers and people that work at the ports. Very different than the people that I sort of work with, and neighbors, right? And even I've also been fortunate to travel and see different places and meet different people. And so sometimes people can't understand how people could possibly have different views from them. But the fact is, there's millions of people out there that think that you're crazy, right? And probably some of them are actually pretty decent people, right? And so, I went camping last weekend with my family. And so from my office to an hour outside of town, I passed all sorts of stuff. People that were very liberal, people that were very conservative. You go from maybe the more urban area of Wilmington, there's a lot of Biden Harris signs and Black Lives Matter. You get out into the country and there's many more Trump signs, right? And so even just going a little bit outside of your normal routine, you start to understand just the level of diversity that's out there and how people think differently. And that goes back to this idea of maybe I'm not right, or maybe like, how can I possibly understand why did Trump win in 2016? Well, a lot of people liked Trump more than they liked Clinton, right? I mean, and so rather than completely dismissing things, whatever side of the aisle it is, benefiting from a diversity of experiences, I think, gives you a different perspective on things. And all those things are necessary to have a civil discussion. And so sort of a thought experiment that I kind of want to close with, and I'm happy to take questions and we can stick around for a little bit. How many people do you know that see the world differently from you? And this isn't, oh, I have a cousin that happens to be a Republican and I'm a Democrat and I see him every 10 years. No, I want to know, how many people do you really know and talk to and converse with and have some mutual respect for that see the world different from you, politically or otherwise? And how often are you able to be in a civil conversation with them? I mean, several of you said, I don't like to talk with people, particularly if they disagree. Well, that's going to make civil discourse pretty difficult. And so I think one of the problems in society today is many of us don't know or have close relationships with people that are different from us. That could be in terms of race. That could be in terms of like identity, sexuality, religion, whatever it is, geography. And all you have to go on is what you see on TV or what stereotypes you have, right? So I'm curious, how many of you really have close relationships with people that are different from you? Think about your circle of friends. You're all kind of the same. In my neighborhood, I mean, there's some diversity there, but we're all people around my age that all have kids around the same age. I'm at a university. I'm around professors all the time. I'm around students a lot. Like, how often are you able to get out of that routine and sort of see and meet other people? Anyone want to share something? This is one of the big benefits of college, actually, is that you, and you guys know this from working with residents, right? think about the people who live on your floor. They come from all different walks of life. That's a very valuable thing for people to interact with people that are different from them. You don't have to agree with everybody. But if you actually have a roommate that's different from you and you can actually agree to disagree, that's much more civil than, oh, well, I'm only going to hang out with my Trump supporters or my Biden or Bernie supporters, right? And I think that if people do some reflection, and this is not an intentional thing, like no one's a bad person if they don't hang out with people that are different from them. It's just sort of a fact of life, right? We like to be around people that are similar to us. We do not like to be around people that disagree with us. We like to watch news that agrees with everything we think, because then we seem really smart, right? We do not want to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, which then makes it very difficult for us to understand when people have different ideas than us. And so I would encourage you, try this. And this is difficult. You will not want to do it, and it will be difficult to do. But make it a personal challenge. See if you can have a civil discussion with somebody and not walk away angry and upset, right? And set some of these ground rules up for like, hey, I just want to sit down and talk with you, right? I mean, do you guys want to, I mean, I don't have to be at this debate watch until 8:30. I got to drive home or whatever. Do you guys want to hang out and just talk about like abortion or something for like a half an hour? Is that a good idea?
Perhaps we could not record the meeting.
Oh, okay. It's funny. Now, I didn't see your video, but Kendall's face lit up. He's like, oh shit, this is going to go down, right? No, that's not going to be a civil discussion. Doesn't matter, right? But there are people that are strong pro-life people. There are people that are strong pro-life, and each of them have really strong convictions for why that is. And if you actually sat down and talked to somebody, you probably could understand that a little bit more, right? And so, I mean, I picked that issue because it's extremely polarized. People have very strong feelings about that, right? But do you think that you could sit down and have a civil conversation about abortion with somebody? That'd be pretty challenging. And maybe that's an extreme example. But I think, you know, everyone loves the idea of civil discourse. But even the people that love the idea have a pretty difficult time having it, right? And so it sounds great. A lot of things sound great in theory, but in practice, it's really difficult to do, right? And so as a political scientist, I don't want my classes. There's nothing wrong with people having views on whatever side of the aisle. I don't want my classes to change people's views. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't even want the civil discourse between you and someone else to necessarily change your views, but rather to have a discussion to better understand. And I think that sort of can make politics a little bit healthier. In political science, I want people to be able to compartmentalize those thoughts and feelings and sort of be able to set those aside sometimes to better understand the world around them. If you are somebody that is very pro-choice and you really can't understand why people are pro-life, right? If you want to change people's minds, you have to understand what makes them tick. So even an understanding of political science can help you, even if you are a partisan or an ideologue or someone that really cares about all these different issues. So I really think looking at politics, trying to think of it more from a political science perspective, as opposed to just merely political and like yelling at everybody, right? To quote the great poet Taylor Swift, you need to calm down, right? And I think sometimes, listen, there are some big issues going on that people have strong feelings about and issues that impact a lot of people. But typically yelling at people is not going, like if I just yell louder, maybe they'll change their mind. That seems less likely to happen, right? And so I think I'm glad that you guys asked to talk about civil discourse, because I think it is something that, and you know, there's people that, you know, maybe we want to get rid of the Electoral College and we want to have this constitutional amendment. That's actually really tough to do. What you have the ability to do in your daily life is to be more civil, right? And you can still vote for whatever candidate you want to vote for, right? That's how the elections are won. You tally up the votes, right? Well, Hayden, I talked for a long time and you guys interacted, so that was good. And I want to make sure that I at least answer some questions. And of course, if people need to go, if you need to go, that's fine too. But I feel like I don't want to immediately kick people out if they have questions. So I'm happy to stick around for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. If anybody has any questions please feel free to unmute yourself or type in chat right now.
And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that you could also go to the debate watch tonight. It'll start at 8:30 and it'll just be a chat or a video conversation with some other professors and some other students. The debate you'll be able to watch at 9 o'clock, and we'll continue the chat, and then we'll get on after the debate. And so that information is in the chat right now. It is also worth a couple of other things. Feel free to shoot me an email. Any questions that come up later. If you want to learn more about political science, if you just want to ask a political scientist a question, if you need restaurant recommendations, shoot me an email. Our website is uncw.edu/PIA. You can learn about some of the different programs, but of course you can email me for anything. So questions.
Hi, King. It's Kinsley again. I'm the water bear. I did have some questions. So I am currently a environmental science major and a philosophy and religion major. So I'm very familiar with having to have conversations that can get pretty heated because people are very passionate. I was just wondering if you personally had any like methods for like when a conversation does get too heated of either how to diffuse that situation or how to get out of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's tricky. And truth be told, like I typically avoid these conversations, right? In part just because I sort of know how they can go. And, you know, the one thing that I think you need to go into sometimes a conversation with, if you're talking about politics, whether you want it to be civil or not, like you're probably not going to change the other person's mind. And actually, the more that you try to change their mind, you're actually going to probably make them even have stronger feelings that they disagree with you, right? And so, but again, I think that's why that setting is so appropriate. Like if you go in and be like, listen, I know you and me disagree on politics. That's fine. I just want to sort of learn. And the thing is, you can't say that and then judge the person as soon as they can't accurately articulate why they actually like this issue or that issue, right? And you know, if you are somebody, I mean, sometimes people love to debate with people that are different. They're like, hey, try to convince me about this. The other thing is you have to be open to the idea that maybe you're wrong and be like, I've never actually thought about it from that perspective. If I take your perspective, I can see where you're coming from, right? And you know, you're gonna have people sometimes in politics who are like, well, I don't, you know, I like this issue, I think, but I don't really understand it. That's okay. No one says you have to understand things. And so, you know, I think with anything, like I tell people you shouldn't talk to a professor as soon as you get a grade back because like you're all upset that you did really poorly, right? Like sleep on it, right? You know, no good text message comes after like 10 p.m. That's never good, right? Like you have to find, you know, go to a public place where it will be a little bit socially awkward as soon as you start yelling and swearing at somebody, maybe. And, you know, I think it's okay to say, listen, we're both getting pretty heated about this. Let's just walk away. Like no hard feelings. So I think people need to have, you know, good expectations about what is and is not going to happen. But again, I think it's really useful. And I actually enjoy learning why people think the things they think. Right. And as sort of a scientist, like that's interesting to me. I mean, political scientists and most people thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win the 2016 election. And after the election, there were some professors or students walking around like, I can't believe Donald Trump won it. And maybe if they didn't like Donald Trump, like, oh, this is terrible. I don't like Donald Trump. And I said, listen, like you have to get over the fact, as a political scientist, you have to get over the fact that you don't like what happened. And you have to start understanding why that happened. Right. Yeah. And that's what, I mean, in politics, there's wins and there's losses, and you have to be willing to move on from the losses so then you don't lose the next time, right? And so I think, like I mentioned, there's something about political maturity that has to come in. And I think you need two politically mature people that are comfortable in their views and also comfortable in saying, geez, this is my perspective. Maybe it works out well for me, but maybe it doesn't work for you, right?
Thank you.
I did pull up the water bear on my other, I mean, it's a really small animal, which I sort of expected. So it's a micro 8-legged animal, according to the people at Wikipedia.
Yeah, they're very cool. I love them. They can live on space, and we actually spilled some, I think, on the moon.
Oh, well, that's fun. Other questions?
Hi, Dr. King.
Hey, Rose, I saw you there. Good to have a student here. What's going on?
So I just had a question. So how do you think, kind of piggying off of Kinsley's answer question, so how do you think that as RAs and as student leaders, we should confront the current environment in our college and in our community when it comes to civil discourse? Like, how should we approach it in a effective and using our, I don't even know how to word this right, but what's the most effective way that we can have a conversation with somebody, even though we have disagreeing opinions, to where we can find a balance, especially during the current political climate of our own university and our college campus and our school, basically in our country. That was very confusing.
So these are very difficult questions, right? You know, if it were me, people need to be themselves, and they're fine to believe the things they believe. One of the benefits that I feel like by me not being political in my role is that I feel like I can talk to students and students don't feel like I'm coming at them with some agenda, right? And so, for example, if you're an RA and you put up a Trump sign or a Biden sign on your door, hey, God bless you if that's what you think, and that's fine. That is your right to do that. But you have to understand that that may make some people more or less likely to talk to you, right? And when it comes to, you know, our sort of campus culture, and I don't know if there may be some specific things that you're thinking about there. I don't think that these are necessarily all things that are unique to our campus. I think that, you know, UNCW is not the most diverse place. And I know that the university is working on that, and we all sort of recognize this thing. And, you know, I even talking among faculty, you know, one solution is, well, you need to hire more people of color as professors in order to recruit more students and things like that. And that's all true. And, you know, there's been a big debate about the banners and such on campus. But I think, as people have said, and I think that they're right, the issues aren't necessarily about the banners. They aren't necessarily about the number of this or the number of that. Those are sort of like benchmarks or whatever. But I think it's the underlying issues that are a little bit more problematic. One solution that I have is that people should not be a jerk. That's a nice PC way of saying it, right? Like, don't be a jerk to other people. If people are different from you, don't be a jerk about it. They're just different. Like, that's okay, right? And, you know, it's one thing to and be like, hey, in my experience, I haven't really experienced this, and maybe your experience is different. Looks like we've had different experiences. That's what a non-jerk would say. It's immediately of like, well, you're an idiot because that's not actually how the world works, right? And so I think there needs to be some of that empathy that I talked about earlier. And so all these things are things that individuals can do. There's some big issues that are going on, and sometimes, as much as we want to try to affect the things around us, and by all means, we should try to do those things, a lot of it sort of starts with us in the mirror, right? And, you know, I don't know, Rosa, if that helps. I find that when I talk to people, I give a whole lot more, I make people think of more questions when they maybe want more answers.
I know, but I was just gonna ask one more thing. As a political scientist myself, like, I get kind of like, not angry, yes, angry, when people say like they don't want to vote and things like that. How do we have a conversation about that? Because that's what I've been having like the hardest issue with, is just having a conversation about people who don't want to vote. Yeah. And then don't want to register, while the entire 4 years that I've been here is like, vote. So like, how
you know, I mean, again, you can't make people do some of these things, right? And yet one thing that, you know, especially when I talk to people, sometimes people, like, if you don't like how politics are today, whatever, if you don't like the polarization, but if you choose not to vote, then you're really endorsing the current environment. Like, the way in a democracy to do things is to participate and engage. To the extent that you disengage, you're running away from the problem, right? Voting, I mean, college students are less likely to participate in politics, less likely to vote than the average American. And there's reasons why. I mean, you got a bunch of stuff going on. I understand that. You're busy, you're away from home, you're not sure where you're registered, you don't have a lifetime of history of voting and that sort of thing. And so I don't necessarily, I don't hold it against college students when a student yesterday admitted, she's like, I don't really tell people this, but I've never voted before and I'm not registered to vote and I'm a political science major and I feel really bad about that, right? I think one thing that you can try to do is you can't go after and demean a person like, what the hell's wrong with you? How can you not vote? Right? Well, now you've just attacked them, right? Well, hey, why don't you think you want to vote? I don't really know what the issues are. I don't really know what the candidates are. Well, then you have to help sort of inform them. There's people that say, I want more people to vote. But what they actually mean is I want more people to vote for my candidate. And maybe one of the reasons why people don't vote is maybe they don't know who to vote for, right? But as soon as people feel like people are coming at them with some sort of an agenda, well, then they're more likely to sort of back off, right? So if it is true that you really want people to vote, then you should be okay if they vote and they vote for the other side, right? I mean, I think that's a fair thing for people to think about. Help people understand maybe why some of these issues matter to them. And if they don't matter to them, maybe they matter to other people. Right. I mean, with the pandemic, I've tried to tell people like, maybe the pandemic doesn't impact you, but my kids are at home right now doing virtual school. And let me tell you what, it messes with them and it messes with me. So if you don't want to wear a mask for yourself and follow the rules, do it for me. Right. Because at some point it may affect you. Right. And so I think trying to have people understand how things can affect them or maybe how it can affect other things or things that they care about. What do people care about? If you care about student loans, if you care about the environment, then there's ways that you can sort of approach those issues. So that might be something.
Thanks, Dr. King. Everyone should take a class with him at least once if you guys should, if you can.
Thank you. Rosa is really gunning for some extra credit or something here, but she's right. I mean,
maybe.
Anything else?
I just had a thought off of Rosa's point. I feel like a lot of people who choose not to vote, it could be very well out of apathy, just they don't care to go do it. But I feel like a lot of people they're picking their poison, sure. Right? Like they're not really fully sided with one candidate or the other, and they feel like they're trapped. And so like it's kind of like I guess just a lack. I guess an indifference because they feel like they're
the better of two evils or something like that.
Yeah.
No, I think that's very common. I don't like the two-party system. I don't like this. I don't like that candidate. I don't like no one says you need to marry this candidate here, right? If somebody says, do you want chicken or fish? I don't like either of those. Well, I guess you're not eating them, right? Like that's sort of the choice. Yeah, there's only, there's more than two choices. There's different party candidates and that sort of thing. But I feel like, if you don't like Trump or you don't like Biden, but maybe you like Biden a little bit more than Trump, if you don't vote for the person you like a little bit more, then you're not helping their case. And then maybe you'll end up with somebody that you really don't like, which maybe is Donald Trump, right? And the time that you can have to have a little bit more choices is in primary elections, right? So few people vote in primaries. That's when you have the choice that maybe you're a Democrat or Republican. Here's all these people that are running, right? And maybe you don't like either one of the presidential ticket, but if you take a look at your sample ballot, there's all sorts of races on there. And maybe you like one of those candidates, right? And so, yeah, I don't think, you don't have to love everything about a candidate, but you have to think about maybe what are the most important issues to you and maybe what candidate you side with a little bit more, and do that. Again, you'll probably forget who you voted for in a year, right? Right? Again, it's not like you need to wear a badge around that says I voted for this candidate. I think that's one of the problems is people, and they feel like they have to choose one of these sides, but as soon as they choose one of those sides, that like they're just attached to that person. And if somebody finds out that you voted for Biden or you voted for Trump, sometimes they jump to this conclusion that you must endorse everything they've ever done. You must agree with them on everything they've ever said. No, it just so happened that you like that person a little bit more than you like that person, right? And so, yeah, I certainly hear that a lot, and I would encourage people to think a little bit more deeply than just I have two bad choices, so I'm going to pout about it and not vote.
I'd like to add something that I was thinking about ever since you mentioned that you have political science students who were not jumping at the opportunity to speak or be interviewed. And I think that cancel culture has such a huge part to do with why people are so hesitant to speak, because we have such access to records of what people have said for decades, and to hold, and people do need to be held accountable to what they say and what they do. But I think young people now look at that and like, I don't want this to be held against me, so I'm not going to say anything. To say, like 20 years later, I want this to come up and have it on record or be canceled because I have an opinion that's different from other people. So I don't know if that's a question as much as I just think the access we have and the records that we're able to keep through social media scares people to say anything, because then that's the stance that you take for the rest of your life, or at least people will assign that to you for the rest of your life. And it takes a lot of bravery, I think, to speak up, especially being young, or just defending your own opinion, no matter your age, can be a scary thing. It's very vulnerable. But
no, I hear you, and I think Hayden recorded this session, so who knows what I said that sometime will be held against me. I think that you're right about that, and I mean, I do think that particularly young people and old people too, I mean, need to keep in mind, like, yeah, in the age of social media, like there is a record of all these sorts of things, which should sort of make you feel like, think twice before you just immediately say, and at the same time, I mean, how many of you have changed your mind on something, whether it's political or otherwise? Are you okay with that? Yet, as soon as a politician changes their mind, we crucify them, right? And again, this cancel culture, and maybe there are certainly instances of things where people probably should be canceled, but then there's probably also instances where maybe that shouldn't take place. Nobody's perfect, right? And I mean, I said earlier, you need to get over the fact of thinking that you're right. As soon as you admit that you're not maybe right about everything, or you just don't know, like, at least that's plausible. That, like, oh geez, I didn't know, right? I said that, but I didn't mean that, and I've evolved. Like, what I did then is not what I think now. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be a better balance between those things, because I do think one of the reasons that people don't want to talk about politics is because maybe they're a little bit uncertain, or they fear that they're going to be judged. And so the way that we can prevent that is to not judge people ourselves, right? As soon as you don't judge me for my opinions, then it's hopefully, reciprocal. Anything else? I'm trying to make sure that I don't make it home before I put my kids to bed. So I'm trying to time this right.
Are there any more questions for Dr. King?
Well, hey, this was a lot of fun, Hayden. I appreciate you and everybody else setting this up. And I really like this sort of format. The pandemic is terrible, but we are learning to use technology in a few different ways. So this was fun, and I hope maybe some of you can come to the debate watch later, and continue to be engaged. Try to think about some of the things we talked about tonight and see how you can apply them in your own life. I mean, you guys are leaders on campus, or leaders among mentors, and people, believe it or not, do take direction from people like that, right? And so yeah, see what you can do to make the world a little bit more civil. How about that?
Thank you, Dr. King.
Happy to do it, and please be in touch if I can ever help you guys out with anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Take it easy, guys.